I want to pivot from here, if we can, to here in Columbia. The scene that Wolf describes is from 1968, from a protest at Berkeley that he bumped into. But of course, 1968 was a grain year for protests across the country, protests against the American involvement in the war in Vietnam, protests for civil rights. We talked about some of these when we were looking at the Armies of the Night, when we were reading Simon Hall's account of the anti-war movement and the civil rights movement, and their sometimes difficulty in coming together. And I want to think, just with the time we have left, which is it much a little bit about how some of the ideas and concerns that we've been thinking about for the last 3 weeks might still be shaping the way that conversations, big, important conversations, are had on this campus. And I know that's, I imagine for everybody here, it's a difficult issue to think about, but it seems, and I'm not the only one to find this intersection, that there is something about the reaction to the war in Vietnam in the 1960s and the way that recent protests on this campus have been organized that suggests a kind of continuity. And I'm most curious, I think, about what our own thinking about the American involvement in the war in Vietnam in the 1960s might reveal about our present moment and what it could offer us in terms of an approach to it.
There was a movement against the war, but at the same time, what sparked this issue, at least according to this, was controversy about the school, Columbia University, building a gym on Morningside Park, taking over the green space here in Harlem. So, and that caused community pushback.
Yeah.
So, and the students got involved.
Right. So much like Wolf's description of this protest, where all of a sudden there's a question about student expenses and tuition payments and what's going on in Cuba and the war in Vietnam. So in 1968 in Columbia, there's a combination of issues of local importance to this neighborhood and global importance, right? America's involvement in the war, Columbia's support for America's involvement in the war, as the protesters saw it, with direct support through institutions that were responsible for helping America achieve its war aims, and then local support. It's about green space. It's about a park, right? What do those two different, and I'm painting still with a broad brush, but those two different objectives, how do they interrelate again, or how do they kind of come or shape the way that the protests unfolded in 1968?
Oh, and in part, there was, harking back to when I was talking about civil rights plus the war protest, because the park was in a community which was primarily black, and it was primarily black students who were protesting Hamilton Hall. Mm-hmm. I mean, then there's also, the whole critique of Columbia protests is that it was white male protests. Mm-hmm. Women and black people were not empowered in those protests.
Okay.
So
in 1968.
Right.
What about recently? The recent protests.
I mean, there were the same parallels because the protests were about disclosure and divestment, is very complex, but also about the extension of Manhattan Bill. And so I think they were very clear parallels. But I also think they're actually really related because I ultimately think what activism is saying, stop spending the money we're going into deep debt for on messing up other people's lives, whether that is in Harlem or on the other side or overall. But I think as I did come here on Sunny Virginia from here to here, Linda Angus are the conveyors to poor. And I think when I first learned about these protests, they told me like total in 68 protests, which they totally put on a pedestal for the 50th anniversary. Scene. I didn't quite grasp that these like the duality. These protests are actually hatred and they're all quite related. But I after reflecting on why I do think they're related is it, like their ultimate aim was that they stop spending our money on messing up other people's house, whether that's next door.
Okay. I think it's a fantastic continuity and an assertion then of and I think if we could speculate, perhaps something very similar to what Wolf was uncovering in Berkeley, too, in 68, maybe a similar kind of expression. In either local, global, same, yeah.
And in building on that, both of them seemed opportunistic and not in a negative way. It's like we're upset.
Okay.
There's an event that's happening that helps to crystallize and galvanize us in this moment, and so we're going to take advantage of it and express ourselves in all of those kind of meaningful ways. And so that they're bigger than what, in memory, are the Columbia protests seem to be about getting non-war. But reading this, and you hear the story about Morningside Heights, you go like, oh, that's not part of the bigger narrative. It was always about the Vietnam War in the same way that the current protests are bigger than just, are showing
Divestment.
the U.S. Yeah, divestment.
Right. All right, good. And this, again, I think we're back in the territory of the battle for memory, the war for memory and what that might be, whether it's an actual war we're remembering, or in this case, the protests that are involved, and how we continue to shape that or think about it over the years. I was interested in your comment about the protesters being lionized some years on in 2018 for this the 50th anniversary, and maybe, or I'm curious because I did see this, to what extent those recollections addressed the conflict, right, between non-white participants, between women and the leadership. I don't want to put you on the spot because I didn't see it, but I think it's a fantastic.
I mean, it haunts me. Like, at what point over the last 50, or between 68 and 2018, at some point, all be flipped to the narrative, and the 68 protests became something that can't be liked.
Yeah.
And like, I would love to hear from people who saw that flip happen in this room, because it does haunt me, because I do think there's going to be a time in 30 or 50 years we'll look back to 54. It's also put on a pedestal. When I was here, I was student. They updated the website on the 50th anniversary of 1968, and there were little girls who had climbed up Butler Library 50 years ago to cover the names of the little philosophers with women's names. I believe they were disciplining them, but as a student, they invited them back to do it as a celebration. You studied 68 protest in class. I think it was Vanity Fair did like a 30-page amazing interview that everyone should read. So many of the protesters, and so at some point it became something good, but it wasn't at the time. So Henry people were arrested, and then so one day it seemed I will have the answer that at some.
Does anyone have the answer? I mean, it's fantastic. Because it's probably was slow changing. I'm imagining. Does anyone have the answer?
Oh, and I'll even more. I was pair guide in my year. I pulled my handbook last year, and then the handbook trained with the tour guides who started 10 years ago. We were taught to teach about the protests. Come to this school. Right. You can study human rights. You can study activism. Right. I wish I had come near the handbook this year.
Whether or not the administration would issue the same.
I was alive then. I remember it. Because it's two things I remember. One is my mother reading the paper and shaking her head and saying, I can't believe it, that this 35-year-old professor had lost 10 years of his research to one of the protesters who decided to burn it. So I'm like, oh, that's the protest. Of course, I was already marching in high school against the Vietnam War, but, so there are both sides of this, many sides of this monster. And then, did I say it was time to apply for college? Did I apply to Columbia? No, because women were not admitted to Columbia at that time. So Yay, we did this wonderful protest, but was that professor, was he part of the narrative? You know,
No, so,
simple.
right, no, so how he fits, I don't know. But it's, again, and I hate to do this because I've chronically mismanaged our time this whole summer. We're already a minute over at the end. What I wanted to say, or what I would ask everyone to reflect on, particularly because you're part of the Columbia community, are these kinds of continuities between this world that we've been thinking about, the literature, the texts that we've been reflecting on that have stretched since 1955 through to today, how this world continues to shape our responses to very real challenges in the here and now. And I certainly don't have all of the answers for how to save the world going forward, but I think reflection, maybe a little sympathy for one another could certainly help show us the way.